Abandoned Soviet space shuttles. There's nothing quite as sad as an abandoned space shuttle. When NASA lost its funding and people stopped going to the moon, that was a bad time for humanity. There's a disturbing reminder of the lack of common interest in exploring space located currently at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. There are 2 Buran prototype shuttles sitting in an abandoned hangar that never actually got to go to space. While most of the Cosmodrome is still operational, this particular hangar looks like it hasn't been opened since the 90s. These 2 archaic pieces of machinery are the last remnants of the Russian space program that started in 1974 and was closed in 1993 after the Soviet Union fell apart. And rather than putting the space shuttles in a museum or something, they're just sitting in a massive, decrepit hangar collecting dust and bird poop. One of the shuttles was meant to be an operational prototype, while the other was a test mock-up. Neither shuttle was ever completed. You can see from the photos that the scaffolding and work equipment is still flanking the shuttles, as if everyone went home one day and just never bothered to go back and finish the job. The ancient rock ship of Asuka. Strange megalithic stone structures are spotted all over the forest in Asuka, Nara, Japan. Called Masudo no Iwafune, or the rock ships of Masuda, they're found in an area known for its many Buddhist temples and shrines. But there are actually several stone monuments in the hills that don't fit in with any other construction. No one seems to know who built them, or when. The village itself dates back to 250 to 552 AD, and these date to before then. The most famous one is 36 feet, 26 feet, 8 meters wide, and 15 feet, 4.7 meters high, with a weight around 800 tons. There are 3.2 feet, 1 meter square holes carved into the top of the structure. It may have been constructed by Buddhists for some type of ceremony, given the region's many Buddhist temples and shrines. But these rocks don't resemble the architecture of any known Buddhist structure. Perhaps the stone was carved to commemorate the former Masuda Lake, which was once nearby but was drained. The structure may have been an astronomical observation point. A ridgeline on the top of it runs parallel to the mountain range in Asuka and aligns with the sunset on a day called Spring Doyu Entry. This day may have signaled the beginning of the agricultural season, but scholars' favorite theory is that they are ancient tombs of a royal family and maybe used to have a lid. But pretty much everything about them remains a mystery.
The T-95 super tank. Russia has a long history of designing some pretty bizarre prototype weapons. Normally, these prototypes never actually reach the construction phase. But the T-95 super tank, built at the end of the Cold War, was indeed built as a tank to end all tanks. Had development continued, the T-95 probably would have been the scariest tank in the world. But the technology was eventually abandoned in favor of the less interesting T-14 Armada. The tank was part of the Object 195 project. Designing started in 1988 with the idea to make a heavy tank that would outclass all NATO armor. This meant the crew members were stuffed into an interior compartment with the turret being unmanned. The tank was also fitted with explosive reactive armor and composite armor, along with soft kill systems whose capabilities are still unknown to this day. It was also given a 152mm 2A83 smoothbore gun, which boasts an amazing muzzle velocity of around 6,000 feet per second. The tank also had 152mm howitzers for firing all manner of artillery rounds. But alas, they actually only ever built one single prototype. The T-95 tank was simply too big and too bad for this day and age. They went with the T-14, which comes equipped with more technological features like jamming capabilities.
The Ford Nucleon. Perhaps the most interesting abandoned piece of technology when it comes to cars is the Ford Nucleon from 1958. Just like the name of the car suggests, this vehicle was supposed to be powered by nuclear energy. This was almost 30 years before the disaster at Chernobyl, when designers at Ford figured that they could make a totally safe car with a nuclear reactor sitting in the trunk. At the time, it seemed like a perfectly rational thing to do. Of course, this was in the optimistic 50s, when everyone thought we would be living on the moon in 30 years. This was a time when people thought that nuclear energy would abolish oil altogether. Unfortunately, Ford never actually made a working version of the Nucleon, and that's a real bummer. The concept was that you would have fueled it using uranium pellets. How exactly you would have purchased your uranium pellets is beyond logic. They can't exactly sell uranium at gas stations. However, this vehicle is a real blast in nostalgia. It was a great concept, but it just wasn't something that made sense on a massive scale. And so the project was inevitably abandoned and forgotten. The Viking's navigational sunstone. We all know the brutal history of the Vikings, and thanks to the ultra-popular show on the History Channel, many of us have a pretty clear image in our minds. Plunder, war, victory, beards and axes, a murder of hungry crows, a tinge of Thor, and a touch of Odin. But did you know the Vikings were secret scientists, and that they created what some would argue was the world's first sun-catching crystal compass? This is of course the fabled sunstone of which I speak. Norse sagas mention this mysterious sunstone for navigation, but what was it exactly? The closest thing we have to it today would be a compass. The Vikings' method of navigating the seas with their sunstone was far beyond their time, and they had the advantage over other people living in the same time period. Just ask all the towns they attacked and plundered. In essence, the Vikings took a stone, what researchers believe to be something called Iceland's spar, and used a block of it to locate the position of the sun during cloudy, miserable, and otherwise impossible conditions at sea. Cloudy weather at sea, even with the technology we have today, is still challenging and not great. Scientists believe that this Iceland spar was calcite. The calcite helped to split light and depolarize it, so you could determine the location of rings hidden behind the sun. Science magazine reported that to see if calcite is accurate enough for navigation, a team led by Guy Ropers, a physicist at the University of Rennes 1 in France, built a sunstone. They used a chunk of calcite from Iceland's spar and locked it into a wooden device that beams light from the sky onto the crystal through a hole. They found that the sunstone came within 1% of the true location of the sun, even after it was below the horizon. Their clever use of the transparent crystal allowed them to sail their vessel all the way to Canada before any other explorer ever did. Their smart use of the ancient sunstone was also the Vikings' key to terrorizing the Frankish and English coasts for years.
The rolling rocket bomb. The rolling rocket bomb was one of the worst ideas in military history. It was designed to kill Nazis, but instead it killed somebody's dog. The rolling rocket bomb is actually known as the Panjandrum, and it's arguably one of the biggest flops in military history. The British concocted this bizarre device to break through the German defenses when storming the beaches of Normandy. Here's how it worked. The engineers attached rockets onto two giant wheels joined together by a drum axle. The axle was lined with deadly explosives. The rockets were supposed to propel the wheel up the beach, and then the bombs would blow up the Germans. In theory, this sounded great, but the technology totally bombed, pun very much intended. When they tested it out, the Panjandrum flew up the beach, the rockets dislodged, and the whole thing exploded. An army officer's dog chased one of the rockets down the beach and was killed in the attempt. Immediately after, the technology was abandoned.
Soviet magnetic train. In the 1980s, at the height of the USSR, they had 15 republics that spanned across a massive amount of land. As you can probably imagine, getting around in the Soviet Union from one place to another was not the easiest thing to do. So, a company called Maglev Trains stepped up with the Wagon TA-5 train to try and fix the problem. It was the very first magnetic levitation train of its kind to be used in the USSR. The first model built could only fit a few dozen people, but larger models would have been used as shuttle pods to bring people from one republic to another inside the Soviet Union. The train could reach a maximum speed of 248 miles per hour, which for the time was absolutely unheard of in a ground vehicle. Unfortunately, the train never really took off. Maybe that was because it looked like kind of a spaceship. But more likely, it was just because the project was way too expensive and the Soviet Union was already collapsing by the time the first prototype was made. However, it's safe to say that if the Soviet Union had not crumbled and funding for the trains had been in abundance, there might be a vast train system stretching all across Russia, East Europe, and even Central Asia. The Egyptian ramp. The last time you entered an apartment building, a shopping complex, or even a school, chances are you didn't look at the wheelchair ramp and immediately think about ancient Egyptian technology. You didn't, did you? Of course not. Why would you? Most people don't know that the ancient Egyptians were the first human beings to skillfully use ramp technology. But it's true, they were. The Egyptians did it first. Only, they weren't using ramps 4,000 years ago to get wheelchairs safely in and out of the pyramids. They were building them to get those massive stones in place higher up on their pyramids. According to researchers, early Egyptians figured it out that it was easier to slide large slabs of sandstone up a soft ramp using leverage and manpower than to haul them up using ropes. And while the scientific evidence of these early ramps isn't 100% concrete, One only needs to observe the impressive shafts in places like the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Valley of the Kings to see how Egyptians utilized tunnels and ramps to get things from one spot to another. Looking inside a pyramid is like looking into an anthill. So, is it any surprise that the Egyptians were Earth's first mighty builders, using ramp technology way ahead of its time?
The failed Nazi rocket. The V-2 was an utter failure of Nazi technology. Each V-2 rocket was about 46 feet high and carried a ton of explosives, literally. In the autumn of 1944, the Germans used their newly developed rocket technology to attack London. The very first V-2 rocket plunged down onto the city, gouging out a 32-foot crater and killing 3 people. These were a massive upgrade from the V-1 flying bombs, but not quite revolutionary enough for Hitler to win the war. It was a kind of last-ditch effort to defeat the British, but it didn't work. They fired over 1,300 of these missiles at England, Belgium, and France. Perhaps 2,700 people in Britain were killed, according to the BBC. But it could have been up to 20,000, including those who died constructing the V-2 rockets. One of the biggest deals about the V-2 rocket was that it used an automatic guidance system. It was one of the first rockets programmable to hit a particular spot while being operated by a controller on the ground. In that way, it wasn't really a failed technology, just a failed attempt at victory for the Germans. When the Germans lost the war, the Americans and Soviets scrambled to get their hands on the tech first. It would be the Russians who captured the V-2 factory and their test range, then reverse-engineered the technology to use it for themselves.
1960 Barris XPAK 400. The 1960 Barris XPAK 400 is another one of those vehicles from a bygone age. This thing is cool. In fact, it's so cool that if there were one available at my local dealership, I'd probably buy it. The car was developed as a vehicle of the future. It came right around the time when flying cars were an idea and when hovercrafts began to be tested on both land and sea. But the Barris XPAK 400 wasn't designed by Ford or any big-name company. It was put together by a humble car maker from California. He designed a car that looked like it could fly to the moon. It was straight out of the Jetsons. And yes, it really did fly. Of course, it didn't fly very high off the ground. It only levitated using 2 20-inch aluminum fans, and it couldn't fly with a person in it. When it was unveiled at the New York Auto Show, a department store dummy had to sit in the pilot seat while somebody else ran the vehicle using a remote control. And while it caught a lot of attention and looked very exciting, only one was made, and nobody ever chased the idea. Interest in this kind of thing faded. Even though it wasn't a revolutionary technology, if more time and effort had been put into it, we might have some cool hovering crafts today. The Baghdad Battery. We've advanced so far into the future of technology that even batteries are gradually becoming obsolete, at least in the AA and AAA forms we first became accustomed to. And while we think of batteries being new powerhouses for cordless technology, did you know the first batteries may have been crafted in the sandy depths of Arabia in the year 250 BCE? That's roughly 2,000 years ago, and in a desert in the middle of nowhere. The Baghdad battery is a mystical ancient device that makes the potato battery look like, well, like a potato battery. This impressive pre-modern device was basically a clay jar, an asphalt stopper, an iron rod jammed through the middle like a stalactite antenna, and a copper cylinder surrounding the iron on the inside. Once vinegar is added to the jar, you have a miracle of science, a bona fide 1.1-volt battery. But is this what it was supposed to be? It's been suggested that the artifact could have been used for electroplating gold onto objects made of silver. If the pot was filled with an acid or alkaline liquid, like vinegar or lemon juice, then the theory was that this would be sufficient to produce an electric charge. Unfortunately, there's no proof that electroplating was done anywhere at this point in human history, and the artifact is extremely inefficient as a battery. Tests and simulations done by Mythbusters and other academics have shown that the more the Baghdad battery is used, the lower the charge it produces. Sticking a probe into a lemon will provide more of an electrical current than the battery itself. Since then, the battery has gone missing after the National Museum of Iraq was looted in 2003. Scientists and archaeologists are still trying to determine what this strange thing was used for.
The wind cannon. The wind cannon was developed by the Germans as a weapon that could create an artificial tornado. The whole idea was that the Germans could fire their wind cannon at enemy aircraft, creating a literal tornado that could destroy entire squadrons of planes. Weirdly enough, the Germans actually did a pretty good job. They created a vortex cannon that could create a tornado of up to 900 feet tall. The issue is that they couldn't get them tall enough to actually destroy any aircraft. The only thing they managed to destroy were wooden sheds. This weapon was called the Vindkanone. It worked by filling up a large pipe with combustible gas, then sending the gas into a combustion chamber to spin a turbine. The rotating nozzle then released the gas into the atmosphere, drawing air into the rotation to create a vortex. It was a perfectly sound science, but it was honestly way ahead of its time. The wind cannon was abandoned, and as far as we know, nobody tried to build one since. But seeing as it's been almost a century, our advancement in technology probably means that somewhere out there, somebody's military knows how to make artificial tornadoes.
MS Lord Selkirk II. The MS Lord Selkirk II was not a revolutionary piece of technology for its time. It wasn't even really that spectacular. But it is now a very cool abandoned cruise ship. In its heyday, the Lord Selkirk had been a passenger cruise ship that sailed along the Red River and Lake Winnipeg. It even hosted Queen Elizabeth II. However, it didn't last very long. The boat first set sail in 1969, but was retired in 1990. According to a report from the CBC, it's been sitting completely abandoned on the water since the early 1990s, and it's more of an eyesore now than anything else. Some of the more interesting parts of the boat have been donated to the Marine Museum of Manitoba. And even though there have been attempts to salvage the wreck, or at least dismantle the thing and get it out of the water, it's been a slow and impossible process. Tough Roman concrete. When it comes to innovations and ingenuities way ahead of their time, nobody did it quite like the Romans. In their quest to conquer the known world 2,000 years ago, Romans developed roads, waterways, new forms of government, and one technology that functions in the 21st century even better than anything modern science has come up with since. That's right, I'm talking about concrete. Modern concrete crumbles, breaks apart, falls into dust, and can become totally useless after 50 years. And yet Roman concrete has lasted all through the ages. Just look at the Colosseum. It's practically stronger today than it was back in the time of the Roman Empire. So what makes Roman concrete a technology that was way too advanced for its time? The answer is in the formula. It all began with a simple engineer, Marcus Vitruvius, way back in 30 BCE. He made a special batch of concrete that became the golden standard for the empire, getting stronger as time wore on instead of weaker. This was a simple formula of lime, volcanic ash, and seawater, all of it mixed with strong volcanic rocks and then packed into molds and soaked in additional seawater. This simple solution created a concrete magic way ahead of its time. Go figure, the Romans' genius is still relevant today. General Motors Aerotrain. The General Motors Aerotrain was a great idea that failed miserably in the 1950s. The train was designed for two purposes. General Motors wanted to lure people back onto trains while at the same time making travel by train extremely inexpensive for railroads. The whole point was to bring back revenue into the train systems of America while making it fun for the public. Anyone who's ever taken a long train ride knows that it's leagues better than driving, and about 1,000 times better than flying. But yes, it takes absolutely forever. There were some great designs that came about for the Aerotrain, but the issue was that because General Motors created such a lightweight concept, the train was ridiculously uncomfortable to sit in. It was a rough ride, way too slow, and not much fun for anyone. The train was a massive failure, and not a single railroad ordered a set of trains from General Motors. The test models were eventually purchased by the Rock Island, where they were used in commuter service until 1966.
Curving bullets. The Krummlauf was another of Germany's failed secret weapons. It was a curved barrel clamped onto the end of a gun so that soldiers would fire bullets around obstacles. The original idea came in 1943 with the Germans thinking they could use a curved barrel to redirect bullets. One was made with a 30-degree bend and the other had a 90-degree bend. These would be mounted onto armored vehicles with an MP-44 caliber rifle sitting in a vertical position. The curved barrel was pointed through a port and attached to a swivel. The crew inside the tank could fire at the enemy all day long without ever being shot at themselves or hit with explosives. But, of course, it didn't really work. Bullets almost always broke in half as they traveled through the device, or the device itself would break. At best, the gun would fire maybe 100 rounds before completely falling apart.
Persian freezers. Have you ever heard of an igloo in the middle of Iran? Well, that's exactly what a yakhchal is. Ancient Native Americans learned how to smoke meat, Vikings learned how to navigate, the Greeks learned how to govern, and the Persians figured out how to keep ice frozen in the middle of the sweltering desert. Unbelievable as it sounds, it's absolutely true. The word yakhchal means ice pit in ancient Persian, and nothing describes the desert freezer any better than that. To see one of the old ice pits is incredible. They look like giant igloos crafted from soft sand with chimneys stretching way up into the sky. As early technology goes, they were far beyond their time. It took most civilizations another 1,000 years to come up with the fridge. The Persians perfected their freezers, which were an incredible 60 feet tall and housed 6,500 cubic yards of space, by utilizing winds, air patterns, and special watering machines to create an evaporating cooling system that chilled the food and ice within the freezer, especially at night, so that all of the harvested goods would last through the harsh summer season. Now that's innovation ahead of their time.
Caspian Sea Monster. The Caspian Sea Monster looks like nothing you've ever seen before. It's actually a Lund classic chronoplan from the Soviet era, but it looks like something from a weird steampunk movie where the world was covered completely with water and all the land was gone. You're probably wondering whether this thing is a plane or a boat. The answer is that it's a bit of both. Back when it actually functioned, the Caspian Sea Monster flew over the water by skimming across the surface of the waves about 12 to 24 feet in the air. But it only worked on the water. Imagine an aircraft of this size skimming 25 feet across a rural area. It would take out all the houses. In any case, the chronoplan isn't a boat, a plane, or a hovercraft. It's something altogether strange, which is probably the reason nobody uses them anymore. They were in the service of the Russian Navy, only for around 10 years, give or take a few years. Now, the final chronoplan has been towed from where it sat abandoned at the edge of the Caspian Sea for the last 30 years and is being put into a Russian museum. The power of Damascus steel. Number 5 on our list of technologies that were way ahead of their time, Damascus steel. You may have heard the crazy stories about Damascus steel. For thousands of years, there have been claims that swords crafted from this miracle metal were the sharpest blades on planet Earth. Even today, you can hear boasting that Damascus steel swords can slice through rifle barrels like a hot knife through a cheese string. So what is it that allowed these Eastern forge masters to craft such impressively sharp blades? And how did a unique alloy from southern India produce a hardy metal that has yet to be replicated in the 21st century? It all comes down to a type of steel called woots, which originated in India well over 2,000 years before the internet came around and even before Christ. Woots was traded, often via the Silk Road, to the ancient cultural trade center of Damascus, the current capital of Syria. The weapon masters of the time then used the woots to create the infamous Damascus steel we know of today, the fiercest metal ever made. Unfortunately, the original technique was lost somewhere during the 1700s, and so was the original material. All that remains today is the memory of an impressive type of steel technology way ahead of its time. The Ice Ship. An inventor working for the British Combined Operations Headquarters, one of the departments of the War Office, thought it would be a good idea to create an unsinkable island ship made completely of ice. The ice ship would be the best way for the Allies to prevent German U-boats from destroying all their vessels. The idea actually led to a small prototype being built in secret, approved by Winston Churchill himself. And when I say a small prototype, I mean a giant floating piece of ice that weighed 1,000 tons. Geoffrey Pike was the inventor of this bizarre contraption. Pike envisioned a gigantic ship made from ice instead of steel. But in reality, the ship would be built from ice and a pykrete mixture of wood pulp and frozen water, with the wood acting as reinforcement. The prototype was commissioned in 1943 to be constructed in Canada. The model, just 30 by 60 feet, was built on a lake in Alberta and kept frozen through the summer by using just one motor. It was actually quite successful, and a real ship was ordered to be built out of 300,000 tons of wood pulp, 25,000 tons of insulation, 10,000 tons of steel, and 35,000 tons of timber. The issue here, as you might have guessed from hearing all those numbers, is that it ended up costing way too much money. The ship would have been a mile in length and weighed over 2.2 million tons. The project was scrapped because of financial issues, and the technology has been abandoned ever since. The prototype can still be seen today at the bottom of Patricia Lake in Jasper National Park, Canada. It's still there, totally abandoned. The turbine car. Have you ever wondered why they don't make cars jet-powered? Maybe this isn't something everyone thinks about, but Chrysler did back in the 1950s. This was around the same time as the failed nuclear-powered car from Ford. Except that Chrysler actually built the car from the top to the bottom. This is because some people believed that jet engines were the future of automobiles. While many different companies tried to master the jet-powered car, nobody could do it. Chrysler made the turbine, as they called it, in 1963, after nearly 20 years of jet science and tests. But it just didn't turn out to be very popular. Nonetheless, Chrysler continued working on the technology all the way until 1979, when they finished developing a turbine-powered New Yorker.
It was due to release in 1981 as a mass-produced vehicle that anyone could walk into a dealership and buy. However, because of financial issues, the project was terminated and the technology was abandoned. The Archimedes screw. We're about to throw a whole lot of science at you with ancient technology number 4, the Archimedes screw. This ingenious device is thought to have been first implemented by the fabled Greek inventor Archimedes. What's the craziest thing about this machine? Well, it's still used in the modern world today. We use it for pumping sewage inside of high-tech water treatment facilities. The first use of the Archimedes screw was to raise water and drain the enormous hulls of large ships after they returned from sea. Archimedes put together a giant pipe with a helix inside of it. The helix inclined to 45 degrees horizontally. Once the pipe was dipped inside a body of water, the helix would be turned and the water would rise upwards inside the pipe. Think of it like a straw, a giant straw that could drain water 10 times faster than dumping buckets. This was, back in the days of ancient Greece, a marvel in technology and way ahead of its time. Gravity, a special helix, the quick drainage of water. It was a masterpiece. Even today, the design carries water, literally.
Forgotten sea forts. The Mountcell Army sea forts were used by the British during World War II to defend the shoreline. The forts were built as part of the Thames Estuary Defense Network, with anti-aircraft towers that doubled as forts built in 1942. Each fort was a cluster of stilted buildings branching out from a central command post. No aircraft could get past these forts without the British knowing. They were pivotal in keeping the Germans out of England. But after the war, they lost all relevance. There are only 2 left standing today out of the original 3, the Red Sands Fort and the Shivering Sands Fort. Originally, they were decommissioned in the 1950s. The Nore Army Fort was damaged by a storm and then struck by a boat and dismantled. The remaining forts were occupied by a pirate radio station in the 1970s. As recently as 2005, an artist named Stephen Turner squatted in one for 36 days and then wrote a book about isolation. As you can see, the abandoned forts have had quite the history. You can still see them on a clear day when standing on Shoeburyness East Beach. But nobody's actually allowed to go there, as they're considered extremely dangerous and are going to fall into the ocean at any time.
Abandoned Atlas hovercraft. Companies have been trying to build a hovercraft for years. And guess what? It's not gonna happen. As recently as 2005, a company named Atlas Hovercraft Incorporated tried to build their very own hovercraft that they had hoped would be commercially available to transport people across any waterway. The company exploded onto the scene, making all kinds of promises about designs and availability and pricing. Then they just kind of disappeared. Everything went silent. There were no updates given, and now all that remains of this pop-up company is a creepy shell of a hovercraft that was never built. The decaying hovercraft is sitting at a disused airstrip near the Lee Field military base. Nobody knows exactly what happened or why they built the shell of a hovercraft and then just left it sitting at the airstrip, but we do know that hovercraft technology is about as abandoned as it gets. The Antikythera mechanism. The legend of the Antikythera mechanism is one of mystique and intrigue. The world's first supposed computer sat at the bottom of the sea for over 2,000 years before it was discovered and retrieved. And today, it continues to take up space in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, looking like a trio of green rotted rocks. Unlike a rock, these mysterious mechanisms are anything but dull. Through the sea-caused corrosion are hints of modern technology. We're talking about gears with precision teeth, tiny components that look like clock pieces, and something that looks like a measurement ring. It's truly boggling to the mind. And while there are a lot of conspiracy theories circulating to this day about its original creator, many people cry ancient aliens. The truth is that nobody knows for sure who made the device. One thing is for certain, the Antikythera mechanism could have been used to track the moon, the sun, and the planets with startling accuracy. In recent history, special scans have revealed even more intricate pieces inside of the machine, and more fringe scientists have come out raving that the mechanism was lost from a visiting spacecraft thousands of years ago. No matter what anyone thinks or what the device truly did, nothing else like it was created on Earth for over 1,000 years. This was a piece of technology far ahead of its time.
Cultivator Number 6. The Cultivator Number 6, also known as the White Rabbit Number 6, was a machine designed by the British Royal Navy for digging trenches at the start of World War II. The machine was lightly armored, it carried no weapons, and its purpose was to allow soldiers to advance on the enemy position while burrowing underground. The machine would dig a trench as the soldiers advanced behind it, thereby giving them a constant trench to hide in. Then when the machine reached the enemy, it turned into a ramp that the soldiers could climb up. This sounded like a really good idea, but the problem was that it weighed 130 tons. It was an absolute beast, and Britain was only able to manufacture a small number of the machines. In the end, none of them were even used in combat. It just wasn't effective at actually breaking through enemy lines like Winston Churchill had hoped. He'd wanted this machine to turn the tide of trench warfare, but it did no such thing. All the machines were abandoned, about 33 of them, and never used for anything. Antonov AN-24. The Antonov AN-24 comes to us from the Cold War era, a twin turboprop aircraft that is actually still in operation today. The Russian Air Force is still using the Antonov right now, though their numbers have dropped significantly and they've needed to be modernized. The first Antonov prototype was back in October of 1959, with production ending in 1979. There were around 1,300 of these transport aircraft made, with only 100 still in active duty as of 2020. China even made their own copy of the plane called the Y-7. There are also a lot of different variations of the Antonov. The AN-24 was designed strictly for battlefield conditions as military transport. This included anything from VIP passengers to general cargo. The truth is that these awesome planes weren't a failure at all. The technology simply got outdated, and hundreds of them were abandoned across the world. The only people who actually still use them are Russia, North Korea, Afghanistan, Cuba, and Bangladesh, just to name a few.
Archytas' steam-powered pigeon. Steam power is a clever beast. Most of us are familiar with the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the steam engine, coal-fueled trains, and other types of monster machinery. We're all surely familiar with steampunk, the dreamlike visions of 16th century Hong Kong overrun by steam-spewing humanoid automatons. But did you know that the first steam-powered machine was actually invented in Greece, and it came in the form of a pigeon? The inventor goes by the name Archytas, and he was quite famous back in the days of the great Greek pantheon. Among his inventions was a steam-powered flying pigeon. It worked by stuffing an animal's bladder into a light, aerodynamic pigeon, not a real pigeon of course, and then attaching the base of the fake pigeon to the antique kettle. The bladder, filled with steam, reached the point where the seal couldn't take the heat, and the pigeon rocketed off, flying across the sky. And there you have it. A steam-powered flying pigeon far ahead of the invention of steam power.
The hypersonic nuke missile. Reports have been coming in lately that China is currently developing a hypersonic nuclear missile engine based on a design originally abandoned by NASA. This hypersonic missile engine will theoretically propel a nuclear weapon at 6,000 miles per hour. A Chinese research team has allegedly already built and tested a functional prototype. The prototype was based on a radical design put forth by NASA over 20 years ago, only to be abandoned because it was considered too costly. This new weapon allows a nuclear weapon to travel at over 5 times the speed of sound. The original technology comes from the Boeing Manta X-47C, developed back in the early 2000s and then abandoned by the US government because they thought it was too expensive. But as China's military rapidly advances, money doesn't seem to be an object for them. They've now allegedly built their own hypersonic missile system with an impressive range of over 1,500 miles. And at 6,000 miles per hour, well, a missile can reach its destination with startling haste. Thanks for watching. How do you feel about the existence of a hypersonic nuke missile? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video today, remember to hit subscribe to support the channel. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.